Welcome back to RoxomTV News. We apologize. We're experiencing some technical difficulties this morning. It is Monday after all, but it looks like we got things all shored up. So let's get back into this morning's top stories. First up, a deadly shooting near Brown University in Rhode Island left 2 people dead and triggered a sweeping police response that locked down parts of the Ivy League campus for more than a day. Authorities say the victims were not Brown students, but the violence unfolded close enough to university buildings to prompt emergency alerts urging students and staff to shelter in place. Now, as we mentioned, the shooting happened just off campus, but it was close enough to the academic buildings and dorms that emergency alerts went out within minutes, telling students and faculty to shelter in place as police raced to secure the area. Local and federal law enforcement launched a large-scale manhunt, deploying armed officers, tactical units, and helicopters across the neighborhoods surrounding the campus. Now, Brown University canceled in-person activities and shifted classes online as the search continued, with officials warning that the situation remained active and fluid. Authorities say the victims were not Brown students again, but the violence unfolded close enough to campus that there were alerts sent to everybody involved. Now, police later detained a man in his 20s as a person of interest, but he was released without charges, underscoring how early and uncertain the investigation still is. Authorities stress that the release does not rule out future arrests. No suspect has been publicly identified at this point. No motive has been confirmed either, and investigators have not said whether the shooting was targeted or random. Brown University says it is cooperating fully with law enforcement and has expanded counseling and mental health resources for students. Officials emphasize there is no evidence the university itself was the intended target, but acknowledge the incident has deeply shaken both the campus and surrounding community. Now, again, investigators are saying that the search for the shooter is ongoing. They released this video of a person of interest who they say was seen leaving the scene after the shooting. Authorities say they are working to identify everyone who may have been near the scene, but they do face a challenge. When officials were asked if the gunman was even still in the state or the Providence community, Mayor Brett Smiley said they have no idea of knowing. Here's more of what he had to say during a press conference last night. Take a look.
We know that this is likely to cause fresh anxiety for our community. And we want to reiterate what we said earlier, which remains true, which is ever since the initial call, now a day and a half ago, we have not received any credible or specific threats to the Providence community. And so the status of safety in our community remains unchanged. And we believe that you remain safe in our community, though we will continue to have an enhanced police presence throughout the city and on the Brown campus.
Investigators are now urging the public to submit any video or photo from the area, saying there were limited surveillance cameras near the Brown building where the shooting occurred, making witness footage especially critical. Now, for some students on campus, this was not their first time living through gun violence. 21-year-old Mia Tretta was in her dorm room with a friend studying for finals exams when she received the active shooter alert. Now, in 2019, Tretta was shot during the mass shooting at Saugus High School in Santa Clarita, California, when a 16-year-old opened fire. 5 students were shot, 2 were killed, including her best friend. She spoke with the BBC shortly after the events on Saturday, saying that living through this again shattered her sense of safety. Let's take a listen.
In 2019, when I was shot in the stomach at my high school, I lost my entire sense of safety, and I lost my entire sense of innocence that day. And those are things that you can't get back. I have to tell myself I'm never going to get shot again. And now this has happened at my own school, in my community, just again in my lifetime. And gun violence doesn't really, they don't care if you've already been shot before, and they don't care what community you're in. It's an epidemic that touches every single community, not just the ones who have never experienced it before. I was shot in a school shooting, and my entire community here at Brown, a place where I went to kind of get away from the epicenter of what happened, also understands somewhat what I'm going through, and they understand more than they should have to. And this plague has kind of now touched 2 communities I'm in, because it will continue to until there's legislation to stop it.
Another Brown student, Zoe Weissman, was just 12 years old when she witnessed the 2018 mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, from outside her nearby middle school. Now, 17 people were killed in that attack, and speaking with the New York Times, Weissman said she later developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result. She was also in her dorm room when the Brown shooting unfolded. Weissman said she felt panic and anger, struggling to understand how someone could be forced to live through mass gun violence twice, and said the only thing that brought her comfort was believing it was statistically impossible that it would happen again. At a press conference on Sunday, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley was asked what could be done to stop what many described as a uniquely American experience: mass shootings on school campuses. The mayor declined to weigh in directly while the investigation remains active and victims continue to recover. But he did share that one injured student told him they were grateful for the active shooter drills now common in U.S. high schools. Now, according to the nonprofit Gun Violence Archive, the shooting near Brown University marks the 389th mass shooting of 2025 here in the United States. CNN reports it is also the 75th school shooting this year. According to the Gun Violence Archive, in 2025, mass shootings were mostly confined to the East Coast, particularly concentrated to states with the strictest gun rights. Now, as the investigation continues, the campus remains on edge, and the broader national conversation around gun violence once again returns to familiar, unresolved ground. We're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we have more of today's top news stories, including another shooting that happened on the other side of the world in Australia at Bondi Beach. We'll be back with that and more of today's top stories right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Good morning. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Now, after the United States is mourning in the wake of the Brown attack we saw this past weekend, on the other side of the world in Australia, they are mourning as well after a terrorist attack at a Hanukkah celebration on Bondi Beach. On Sunday, 2 gunmen opened fire during the celebration, turning a beachfront gathering into a scene of chaos and mass casualties. At least 16 people were killed, including one of the alleged shooters, in what has become one of Australia's deadliest mass shootings in history. Authorities say the assailants were a father and son duo, and police later found 2 flags associated with the militant Islamic State inside of their vehicle. Now, officials are calling the shooting a targeted anti-Semitic attack. 40 people were taken to hospitals following the assault, including 2 police officers. The victims ranged in age from 10 to 87 years old, with the oldest victim, a Holocaust survivor, dying while shielding his wife from gunfire. Witnesses say the attack lasted roughly 10 minutes and sent nearly 1,000 people attending the event running across the sand and into nearby streets as shots rang out. The 50-year-old father was killed at the scene while his 24-year-old son remains in critical condition in the hospital. The wife and mother of the suspects told investigators the two men had said they were going on a fishing trip. Mourners are laying flowers at a makeshift memorial at the Bondi Pavilion draped in Israeli and Australian flags. Australia's Prime Minister Albanese said the country stands with the Jewish community, condemning the attack as pure evil. Now, a bystander was captured on video tackling and disarming one of the armed men during the attack, an act authorities say saved lives. That man is Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a 43-year-old Muslim fruit and vegetable seller. Now, Ahmed was shot twice and underwent surgery following the attack. In just a few hours, a GoFundMe campaign raised more than $744,000, or about 9.79 Bitcoin, to support him and his family. Now, Ahmed remains in critical but stable condition at a hospital in Sydney. Since the attack, the father of two young girls has become an international symbol of courage and selflessness. Tributes have poured in from around the world, including from the former U.S. president / current president Donald Trump, who called Ahmed a very, very brave person. Now, Ahmed is an Australian citizen of Syrian origin, and his actions have drawn praise across racial, religious, and political lines. His refugee parents have since arrived from Syria to be by his side. Now, during the chaos, another act of courage unfolded in the crowd. Jessica Rosen was attending the event with her family when the shooting began. As her husband ran with their 3-year-old son, Rosen saw a little girl nearby screaming in terror. She dove on top of the child and shielded her until the gunfire stopped and the girl's father was able to reach them. Now, this moment was captured on video we're about to show you, and a warning, this is a challenging video to watch, so.
I got you. 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 We're gonna stay here and we're gonna be nice and safe. And no one's gonna hurt us, okay? No one's gonna hurt us. We're gonna be okay. Okay.
Can you hide?
Yeah, we can hide there.
Now, the child was physically unharmed. Rosen suffered cuts and grazes and later said she witnessed a woman nearby being shot in the head. Her actions are among the many stories of ordinary people stepping into extraordinary danger during Sunday's terror attack. Now, despite already having some of the strictest gun laws in the world, Australia's government moved quickly after the attack. On Monday, officials vowed to tighten regulations further after police confirmed the older suspect had held a firearms license since 2015 and legally owned 6 registered weapons. Prime Minister Albanese said his cabinet agreed to strengthen gun laws and push forward with a national firearms register, addressing how many weapons individuals can own and how long licenses remain valid. Australia's gun ownership system is often credited with maintaining one of the lowest per capita gun homicide rates globally. However, the number of legally owned firearms has steadily increased over the past 2 decades. Even so, gun-related deaths remain low by international standards. In the year ending June 2024, 33 people died in gun-related homicides in Australia, compared with an average of 49 per day here in the United States throughout 2023. Now, critics argue Australia's laws deny civilians a fundamental right to self-defense. They say citizens are legally unable to protect themselves or others during moments of immediate danger, and that self-defense is not an exceptional circumstance, but a basic human right. Now, from this perspective, critics contend that Australia prioritizes state control of force over individual autonomy. Supporters counter that restricting access to firearms remains essential to overall public safety and has prevented for greater loss of life. Now, Sunday's attack was the most serious incident in a broader rise of anti-Semitic attacks across Australia since the start of the Gaza war in October of 2023. Now, these incidents have included vandalism, threats, and attacks on synagogues, buildings, and vehicles. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the Bondi Beach shooting on Sunday. He said he had previously warned Prime Minister Albanese that Australia's recognition of Palestinian statehood in August would fuel anti-Semitism. Here's what Netanyahu had to say. Let's take a look.
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. I wrote, "Your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorism. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets."
Now, the Bondi Beach shooting fits into a much larger global pattern. Since the October 7th, 2023 attacks and the ensuing Gaza war, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents have surged across multiple countries. Police data, watchdog organizations, and academic research all show sharp increases, with spikes immediately after October 7th, followed by sustained elevated levels rather than short-lived reactions. In Europe, several attacks became defining moments. In Berlin in October of 2023, Molotov cocktails were thrown at a synagogue, prompting Germany's leadership to publicly warn that anti-Semitism had no place in their country. In Rouen, France, in May of 2024, police shot and killed a man who had set fire to a synagogue, with officials calling it an anti-Semitic act amid a nationwide rise in such incidents. In the United States, the Anti-Defamation League recorded a 5% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, the highest total since the organization began tracking. The ADL noted that incidents surged after October 7th and remained elevated throughout the year, with more than half tied to opposition to Israel. Now, at the same time, anti-Muslim hatred has risen sharply. In the UK, Group Tel Mama reported record levels of anti-Muslim incidents following October 7th. In the US, the Council on American Islamic Relations recorded its highest number of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab discrimination complaints in decades. Academic studies, including research cited by Rice University, found significant increases in discrimination towards both Jews and Muslims. Now, Jewish monitoring groups report the same exact trend. The ADL in the United States and the Community Security Trust in the UK both warn that persistence of anti-Semitism into 2024 and 2025 marks a troubling shift, not a temporary reaction. Taken together, the data shows a global pattern of parallel rises in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Rights groups and analysts say the geopolitical conflict, amplified by online radicalization and polarizing rhetoric, is increasingly spilling into local violence. The Bondi Beach shooting now places Australia firmly within that global trajectory, raising urgent questions about community, security, prevention, and how conflicts abroad are reshaping social cohesion here at home. Now, joining us this morning to talk about this story, we have Jessica Cohen. She is an expert in Israeli media and the co-founder of iLatina. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hi, how are you, Hank? It's a very sad morning after everything that happened yesterday, but I'm happy to be here and share with the world what's happening.
Yeah, we appreciate you during these trying times, Jessica, sharing your information with us. So, in the immediate aftermath of the Bondi attack, Jessica, what have you been hearing from people in the community, friends, family, synagogue members, about how this has changed the way that they're feeling day to day right now? This is a big thing everyone's dealing with currently. How's everyone feeling?
People are devastated. They went through 2 years of constant anti-Semitism, as you said, and they were warning the authorities. They were talking about synagogues being burned, people being harassed. 2 nurses saying on Instagram that they will kill Israelis and Jews, and people are shocked because even though they were facing these horrible attacks for 2 years, this is devastating. This was not only an attack on a Jewish community, there was an attack in all Australia. They targeted Jews, and this was a clear anti-Semitic event. But they did it very publicly in the most famous beach, full of tourists and Australians on a Sunday during a Hanukkah celebration, but not only Jews were targeted. So this means this is an attack to all the West.
Yeah, and for the Jewish Australian community, Jessica, public celebrations like Hanukkah are usually moments of visibility and joy. So my question to you is, how does an attack like this alter the way people think about being openly Jewish in public spaces right now?
They have 2 different kind of streams with these things, because In one hand, we have two rabbis that were killed. A 10-year-old, as you said before, was killed. But on the second hand, we see the Jewish resilience, and we see how the next day, today, they went to the same exact place on the Bondi beach, and they light up the second Hanukkah candle, which it's a clear message. It's saying we're not giving up, we're not hiding. Being Jew is not something that we need to be hide. It's not the Holocaust anymore. We're saying never again, and never again means coming back to the exact place where terrorists were trying to kill Jews and say we're here, we're living here, and we're gonna light the second Hanukkah candle.
Yeah, and I've always appreciated there's always such a wonderful perseverance within the Jewish community. So I'm glad to hear that is still showing currently despite the recent events we just saw take place. But with that being said, there has been a noticeable rise in anti-Semitic incidents globally since October 7th. So Jessica, from your perspective, does this attack feel like an isolated act of terror, or is this part of a broader pattern that the community has been bracing for?
Of course, it's not isolated. This is planned. As you said, it was the Islamic State behind that. And behind the synagogue burn was the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're not talking about only anti-Semitism. They're using anti-Semitism as an excuse to attack Jews, to attack the West, to attack anyone who doesn't think in their Islamic way. They're talking about calling for jihad. On October 8th, they were in front of in the Opera House saying gas the Jews on October 8th, the day after the Jews suffered the biggest pogrom and massacre after the Holocaust. This is not an anti-Semitic or people are on media describing it as gunmen. These are not gunmen. These are terrorists, Islamic jihadist terrorists who want to kill and exterminate anything that doesn't agree with their extremist view. They want to put Sharia law all over Europe. They want to extend their jihad and this holy war to everyone. They screaming Allah Akbar. This is a religious war. This is an invasion of extremism all over the world. Of course, they're targeting Jews now. They're using Jews as an excuse. They're using Israel and the Gaza war as an excuse, but they want to kill Jews and they want to kill Christians and they want to kill any infidel that they wouldn't consider as good as themselves.
Mm-hmm. And Jessica, another part of this story that was particularly interesting, aside, obviously there's the tragedy, but then we also have seen some stories of heroism during these times, including a Muslim bystander who intervened and saved countless lives through his efforts. So my question for you is, how are moments like that being received within the Jewish community? And do they change how people process the trauma that's going on here when you have someone of Muslim descent ultimately put his own life on the line to save people's lives?
Yes, we were very happy to hear that it was a Muslim man who came across and defeated these extreme terrorists. Because remember that I live in Israel, and we have 20% of the population is Arab. And I lived in Yafo among other Muslims, and not every Muslim believes in this idea of jihad and conquering the world and killing infidels. So it's very nice to see that Ahmed gave also he first he got 2 shots out of protecting the Jewish people and the Australian people, and second he was so brave in doing that because he's sending a clear message. Not all Muslims believe in this jihadi terrorism. And it's important to us for being united and to understand that we have these bonds. At the end of the day, we live in Israel, and 20% of the population is Arab, and 80% is Jewish, and we all live alone inside of Israel. So if we talk about the West and Europe and other countries, we can also see there's collaboration, and there's a lot of Muslims condemning terrorism. And for us, it's heartwarming knowing that we have people also having our back, and people within their own communities understand where the dangers. And he went and he grabbed the terrorist. He received 2 shots. And now also we're very happy to know that even Jewish people are donating to his GoFundMe because he saved many lives. So among, like, this is a Hanukkah miracle, you know how we say, like, these things happen in Hanukkah. There's a savior that comes and save the day, because imagine they were fighting, they were firing shotguns for over 5 minutes. You know how many shotguns can be shot in 5 minutes? Over 60. At least people are saying that there were at least over 60, but only 15. It's sad to say that only 15, but this could have been a bigger tragedy if Ahmed wouldn't step in and stop the terrorists. So thank you, Ahmed, so much.
Yeah, I think this is one of the small silver linings we can get from tragedies like this are the people that are acting to bridge that cultural and often religious gap that are many times the root cause of these types of tragedies. And, you know, right now we're looking to the world and the world leaders and getting what their way in is right now. So my question for you, Jessica, is when political leaders weigh in on something like this, whether in solidarity or with criticism, how does that land within the community? Does it offer reassurance, or does it sometimes complicate things further as people kind of get a better idea of what this entire situation entails?
So there's two things. One, there's words. Okay, they can go and say and condemn, which is very nice, and it's not that we welcome their words, but it's the right thing to do, to condemn first and call it what it is. It's a terrorist attack. It's targeted on Jewish people. It's anti-Semitism. That's the first step. Okay, but we cannot only lie on the first step, because politicians sometimes talk, but then when the actions come across, where are them? Because this is a result of 2 years of the Australian government not doing anything to stop anti-Semitism. So of course they will come out and condemn it, but where are the real actions? How are they going to protect the Jewish people? How are they going to protect their own Australian people as well? You can condemn, but the police said, the authorities said that this guy, his name, Navid, the 24-year-old Pakistani descent terrorist, he was already in the list of terrorists with ties to the Islamic State. So they already know that he was there and he was a threat to Australia. And did they do anything? They didn't stop it until it was too late. As you said, they're talking about terrorists holding license for guns and having up to 6 machine guns in their house. So they can talk a lot, the politicians, but are they actually going to do anything to protect the people in their country?
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be interested to see what kind of actions are taken as a result of this tragedy we saw occur yesterday. And Jessica, for people who aren't part of the Jewish community and maybe struggling to understand what support looks like right now, what do you wish more people understood or did in moments like this to support the Jewish community after a tragedy like this?
First, we really love hugs. So of course they can come and hug the people and express their support and solidarity and call it what it is. It's a terrorist attack, and it's an attack of Jewish people. Stop gaslighting Jewish people and saying that their suffering is not correct. Stop using Israel as an excuse to do anti-Semitic acts. Stop blaming Israel for things that are not correct. Stop making all of these comments that only harm Jewish people, and they don't accept that as of now we have been suffering tragedy after tragedy, attack after attack. I don't know if we finished, but we are almost at the end of a 2-year war. I was running from shelter to shelter, missiles, terrorist attack, stabbing, burned synagogues. I receive a lot of online hate as well. We're tired. We cannot deal with this anymore. And the last things we need is more people blaming us and saying that it's our fault for everything, and all this, like, using Zionists as a bad word, as it's not something that we can be in our land with our ancestors, as the Bible says, as our ancestors were there more than 2,000 to 5,000 years ago. So first, acknowledge the Jewish people are suffering. Second, give a hand in whatever you can be words, can be donations to Israel, can be putting a social media post and liking posts. And if someone is saying something anti-Semitic, stop them from saying things or jokes of Jewish people, blaming Israel for things that are not true. So anything that involves speaking up is great. Anything that involves donation and anything that involves also counteracting anti-Semitism where you hear it.
Mm-hmm. And Jessica, before we let you go, if anyone watching wanted to help support families of the victims of this attack, or help maybe propose, new legislation going forward so things like this can't happen again, is there a good place that I can send them so that we can help change the world? So hopefully next time we don't see a horrible tragedy like this. What would be the best place for me to tell them to go?
So as of now, I saw that the Matilda family, Matilda is a 10-year-old girl who was killed in front of her sister, a 6-year-old. They have also a GoFundMe page. Of course, you can reach out to me in ilatina.online or jesse.cohen, and I can send you things about like Magen David Adom or United Atzala, that they also send a delegation of doctors and volunteers to Australia to help. You can also donate to the families of the kibbutzim that were invaded on October 7th. You can donate families of the hostages. You can reach out to me, and I can also the IDF, anything that you want to support, we're here, and contact me, Jesse, JESSY.Cohen on Instagram, and I can tell you where to go.
Perfect. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with us about this tragedy, and we appreciate you giving our audience information, so hopefully we can all bond together and emerge from this stronger on the other side and make sure things like this never happen again. So thank you so much for your time today, and our thoughts and prayers are with you in the Jewish community right now.
Thank you, Hank, so much. Thank you for this space, and thank you for telling the truth and not being afraid of the people online. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your time. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at the Blockchain, at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be returning with more of today's top news stories, so stay tuned. We'll be back your way right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Here are some quick recaps of the top stories from the first hour of today's show. Beginning with a deadly shooting near Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, left 2 people dead and forced a sweeping lockdown of the Ivy League campus and nearby neighborhoods. While authorities say the victims were not Brown students, the shooting occurred close enough to the university buildings to trigger shelter-in-place alerts and move classes online. Police launched a large-scale manhunt involving tactical units and helicopters, briefly detaining and then releasing a person of interest without charges. Now, at this time, no suspect or motive has been identified, and investigators say the search remains active as the campus and city continue to reel. Our next top story this morning, we have Australia is in mourning after a terrorist attack during a Hanukkah celebration at Bondi Beach killed at least 16 people, including one of the alleged attackers, in one of the country's deadliest mass shootings. Authorities say a father and son duo carried out the targeted anti-Semitic attack, sending thousands fleeing and prompting acts of heroism by bystanders who disarmed a gunman and protected children. Now, the attack has renewed debate over gun laws and placed Australia within a broader global rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic violence tied to ongoing geopolitical conflicts. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by our special guest of the day to go over more of today's top news stories. So stay tuned. RoxomTV News will be returning right after this. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Currently, Bitcoin is sitting down around that $86,000 mark. In just the last 24 hours or so, we've seen it go down from the low 90s now to the mid $86,000 range. And with that being said, we're going to get into our Bitcoin story of the day. As a wealthy crypto investor wants to build what is essentially a luxury, blockchain-friendly mini-state in the Caribbean. And yes, the part that's raising eyebrows is the courts. You see, Olivier Janssens, a crypto mogul, is backing a project called Destiny on the island of Nevis, pitching it as a self-contained, tech-forward community designed for entrepreneurs who want fast dispute resolution, crypto-friendly rules, and minimal friction with traditional bureaucracy. The twist here is governance. Under a recently passed Special Sustainability Zones Authorization Act, developers are allowed to test experimental systems of digital asset governance. Now, Janssens plans to use that opening to create a private judicial framework relying on arbitration panels and private judges instead of the island's existing court system. Now, supporters say this is the point. They argue that traditional courts are slow, expensive, and poorly suited to international commerce and digital asset disputes. Destiny, they say, would resolve conflicts faster with clearer rules inside a purpose-built ecosystem that includes luxury villas, medical facilities, and high-end infrastructure designed by major global architecture firms. Janssens insists national law would still apply. Critics, though, are not reassured. Local residents and political figures worry the project amounts to a state within a state, raising serious questions about oversight, accountability, and ultimately who has authority when things go wrong. There are also concerns about land use, strain on local services, and whether privatized governance, even with good intentions, inevitably favors wealth over community interest. Now, this is not the first time crypto-driven communities have promised paradise. Similar experiments around the world have stumbled into lawsuits, political resistance, or financial collapse once market cycles turn brutal. And that context matters. For markets, this story isn't about price action today, it's about ideology. The Destiny project sits at the bleeding edge of the network state concept, the idea that digital communities can eventually rival nation states in how people organize, trade, and resolve disputes. And if it works, it becomes a blueprint. But if it fails, it becomes another reminder that sovereignty is harder to tokenize than people think. Either way, Nevis just became a live test case for how far crypto governance can really go before it collides with reality. And our next story that we're covering this morning, here in a second, as far as our Bitcoin-related stories go, let's bring it up here. One of Latin America's most influential financial institutions is now openly recommending Bitcoin as part of a diversified investment portfolio. You see, Brazil's largest private bank, Itaú Unibanco, recently suggested investors allocate between 1% and 3% of their portfolios to Bitcoin, framing it not as a speculative bet, but as a diversification tool. The recommendation emphasizes Bitcoin's dual opportunity as both an uncorrelated asset and a hedge against currency devaluation, a point that carries particular weight in emerging markets. You see, Brazil has experienced sharp currency swings in recent years, and for investors exposed to those fluctuations, holding globally priced assets can offer meaningful protection. Now, Itaú is careful to stress that Bitcoin should not become the core of a portfolio. Instead, it's positioned as a complementary holding designed to reduce dependence on domestic economic cycles while adding long-term upside potential. Now, this isn't merely theoretical positioning either. The bank already offers Bitcoin exposure through a locally listed ETF and launched Bitcoin and Ether trading services for clients in late 2023, with custody being handled internally. Now, that operational commitment signals a broader shift in how traditional financial institutions are viewing digital assets. Rather than asking whether Bitcoin belongs in portfolios at all, large banks are increasingly debating how much exposure makes sense. Similar allocation guidance has begun appearing in the United States and Europe, suggesting that Bitcoin's role in traditional finance is becoming more normalized, particularly in regions where currency stability cannot be taken for granted. Now, joining us today in our studio to talk about this story and several others, we have the co-founder and chief strategy officer of Ledin and friend of the program, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo. Mauricio, how are you? Always great to have you back on the show. Happy Monday.
Doing great, Hank. Happy Monday, and lots to talk about. You went through amazing news, and LATAM, I think another big one is the elections in Chile, which I think maybe are not on a lot of people's radars, but Chile just found freedom over the weekend, and that's
Yeah.
the dominoes keep falling in LATAM. So I'm very, very happy to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is moving in a direction people like you and I kind of expected, but it is always different when you actually see it in real time. And I want to talk about this story here with you, Mauricio. Now, this bank that we're talking about, this isn't a crypto native firm that's making this call. It's Brazil's largest private bank, literally telling clients to consider a small allocation into Bitcoin. My question for you is, why is it such a big shift when a traditional institution frames Bitcoin as diversification rather than speculation? Is this a turning of the tide in real time? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's such a big deal because they used to call us evil, and
Yeah.
I think crypto natives have been on this band, or have been harping this, banging this drum for a very long time, and I still remember not too long ago when meeting banks, well now 7 years ago, and telling people about lending against Bitcoin, and we would get laughed out of the room being told that that's not an asset. Bitcoin's not an asset. They didn't consider Bitcoin an asset. And but then again, what I think is really funny is that these recommendations for allocations are coming only now that they can sell you that allocation. Right, like they weren't telling you to do these things back before they were able to get all set up. And so I think it's self-serving in many ways. It's inevitable. Many Bitcoiners, we all believe that eventually traditional finance, and no matter how big you are, you will have to bend the knee due to self-interest, right? And that is the whole thesis around Bitcoin. I do think it's a meaningful shift. I think it's saying everything I've said, the case could be that they would still be against it, and that wouldn't benefit anyone. So it is progress. It is welcome. I do celebrate to see more and more TradFi kind of understanding what Bitcoin is. I think if you understand what it is, you'd be recommending it, and this is what's happening, right? You're beginning to understand it, and slowly over time, they will be more and more comfortable making these types of calls, which is, again, if you look at Brazil, they just had a big treasury company launch also. I don't know. I mean, the guys at Orange, shout out to the guys at Orange. I know a bunch of them. They're great people. And Brazil, like every other major economy, is getting its own capital markets and its own banks to play and participate in this new digital future. And I think you're going to keep seeing more and more and more of this. It started in retail, then we went to corporates. Now we're at the sort of top of the food chain in corporates, which is banks. And I think the next domino to fall will be sovereigns.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems to be the way the tide is turning. And like you said, it is convenient that they're coming out and saying that people should allocate 1 to 3% now that they offer services that allow them to do that, but also not surprising. The bank, Mauricio, specifically highlights currency devaluation risk, which is something investors in emerging markets live with constantly and have known about for some time. So my question for you, Mauricio, is from your experience, is Bitcoin increasingly being viewed as a hedge against local currency risk rather than just a high volatility asset in other parts of the world outside of Latin America? Because they experience a set of problems there that we here specifically in the United States haven't really experienced the same way. So what Bitcoin means to them is a little bit different than what it's traditionally meant to us. But do you see people in bigger markets like the United States now starting to see Bitcoin as a hedge against local currency risk, even those like the dollar?
Yeah, yes and no. I think the answer is yes and no. I would say that for most of the people that live outside OECD economies, the way they've been taught and the way they've protected themselves from their local currency devaluation historically has been with the US dollar. So to many people outside of OECD markets, the way to protect yourself from devaluation is by exiting your local currency and buying some form of US dollars. Historically, depending on capital controls, that could be cash. Less so, it would be banks or balances in local banks. Increasingly, more people would be flying to the US to open a US dollar denominated account so they could park digital dollars and not have to carry cash locally. But I think in many parts of the world, they see protecting themselves from local devaluation as they see the dollar as the vehicle to protect themselves. Now, what people are slowly starting to understand, and I say slowly because it takes a little more understanding of macroeconomics and debasement and economic theory to get all these things, to feel the debasement of the US dollar, right? Because this is a very challenging thing to get your head around, because when you're in a country like Venezuela, for example, what you'll start seeing is that the price of the US dollar in your local currency keeps rising and rising and rising and rising. So to you locally, if you're a Venezuelan that holds dollars, your purchasing power in Bolivar terms increases gradually over time. So you don't feel this pain of your US dollar not getting you enough. And so it takes a few more contact points for you to really feel the US dollar is getting devalued, right? Like this, we go back to this idea that if you put a frog in warm water and you slowly increase the temperature, the frog boils. But if you throw the frog in a boiling pot of water, it jumps out. The US dollar still is a bit of like a jacuzzi, if that makes sense. So people will sit there and they get to the US dollar and they feel like they can get relaxed. They are getting cooked, like their legs are going numb, it's going up to the knee, but it takes a while for them to realize they're getting cooked. And only then will they say, well, perhaps I shouldn't be, I'm not really preventing devaluation in the US dollar, because the US dollar gets devalued just like the others. It's just that the water warms up more slowly. And so now, that said, there's many people that do get there, right? So many Venezuelans say, I'm only going to have enough stable coins or dollars for my monthly expenses, right? Like my quarterly expenses. But I would argue that's a small subset. And I think today, people see Bitcoin as a savings tool. Like, for example, as a replacement to the S&P 500. Like, if you're in Venezuela, you can't buy Nvidia, you can't buy Tesla, you can't buy, the NASDAQ. So you end up buying the things you can buy, which are a little bit of Bitcoin here, perhaps a little tokenized gold over there. And that's how you start building your portfolio. It's not really done in a way of sheltering yourself from inflation. It's done because that's sort of like your investment bucket, and you don't really see it as protecting yourself from debasement by making those investments. It's just supposed to aid your already stable dollar position. But that's the next fallacy you have to figure out is not real. The dollar isn't stable. In fact, you need to exit the dollar too. But I think people are still exiting their local currencies into the dollar, and there's probably some room to go there.
Yeah, and the frog analogy is a great one. We as the United States don't seem to really recognize things unless we really touch our hand to the fire and realize that it's burning. Meanwhile, we're all just kind of in here thinking we're in a jacuzzi while our purchasing power is getting eaten alive every day. Now, we've seen a lot of institutions come on board in the Bitcoin space in the last year. Obviously, the temperature in the ecosystem here is a lot different than it was from just a year from now. And this bank specifically says they're very clear that Bitcoin shouldn't be the core of a portfolio, just 1 to 3%. So my question for you, Mauricio, is 1 to 3% for a lot of people doesn't sound like a lot. But I would ask, why can such a small allocation like that still have an outsized impact on portfolio behavior over time? Tell our audience why, even though it's such a small percentage, why this is such a big deal going forward.
Yeah, so there's this concept in venture capital investing that you're going to make 100 investments. And if you look at the world of venture capital, these companies go out, they raise $100 million in a fund, and they'll go out and they'll make 100 $1 million investments, right? And so they need to recover $100 million. But many cases, what will happen is 99 of those investments will go to zero, and one of those 100 investments will 200x. Right, so it'll return the fund $200 million out of the $100 million invested. So the fund itself will have a 100% return on the amount invested. And so equally, if you are putting in, say, 5% of your assets in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin 10x's, right, that 5% allocation in whatever 5 years from now will be half of your portfolio, right? And so that Bitcoin has the chance to return your fund if you consider it to be one out of, say, a bucket of 10 investments or 20 investments in this case, it'll be closer to 25 if you divide every investment equally and down to want to get to the 3%. But the idea here is similar. Bitcoin has a much bigger opportunity to expand by multiples, and we're now pulling these numbers out of thin air just to give you a sense of what the numbers we're looking at, right? Like gold is, last time I checked, it was like $25 trillion in market cap, right? Bitcoin is sub $2 trillion in market cap. So if we believe Bitcoin will become digital gold, it still has 10x in it, right? It has, it even has 5x to get to half of the size of gold. And so these are not, magic bean numbers that we're pulling out of thin air. These are legit reference points that you're looking at with a sort of sound narrative behind why it would get there. And so that's why I think these allocations, although small, can have a big impact. The other thing is, you always have to look at the incentives of the person giving you this advice, right? And this is a bank, one of Brazil's major banks. What do you think would happen if one of Brazil's major banks came out and said, Bitcoin should be half of your portfolio? If they did that, you would go out and you would likely sell a lot of your existing positions. And that would include a lot of Brazilian equities, right? So local banks are still having to walk this fine line between making sure that they embrace this new tech, but they're not seen as the ones driving this cannibalization between investment assets. Because it's great if you have $1 and you invested in Bitcoin, like you made a net new $1 and you invested in a Bitcoin, great. But if that dollar is coming from selling utility shares in Brazilian utilities that some of our pensions rely on, you don't want that rotation, right? And so it's really important for them to walk a line between their recommendations, the impact and the perception of those recommendations.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and that 1 to 3% guidance is nothing really new. We're seeing numbers like that kind of thrown out from a lot of institutions these days. I think even Chase has come out and said like 1 to 5%. And like I mentioned, we're hearing these types of allocations from banks here in the US and Europe and Latin America. So my question is, Mauricio, at what point does Bitcoin stop becoming a controversial allocation and start becoming a standard line item in global portfolios? Like, how far are we from that, or is that place and time already here?
We have one more shoe to drop, and that is a purchase and hold by a central bank. We don't have that yet. And if you listen to people talk, people that I consider much smarter than myself, the difference between gold and Bitcoin today, this one resonated with me, and I read it in a recent conversation. Gold has a bid from central banks. So gold can only go so far down, right? Because there are always central banks looking to buy more gold. And when a central bank buys gold, they're not buying $10,000 worth of gold. They're buying billions of dollars worth of gold, right? And Bitcoin doesn't have that yet. There's no central bank today that says, oh, we're going out and buying Bitcoin. There's some strategic reserve funds here and there, but it's not a central bank position, if that makes sense. There's treasuries, there's gold, there's even some securities here and there. There is no Bitcoin. And so once Bitcoin claims the role of a central bank portfolio asset, which it will, just a matter of time, I think at that point we can say there is no other shoe to drop, right? Like every major balance sheet in the world has an allocation, right? Like right now we have people, companies, we're getting these like state sovereign fund allocations, not really central banks, but sovereign funds. Like we're getting there, but the next one over, the last sort of balance sheet that has to be conquered is the central bank balance sheet.
Right. Yeah, we've definitely seen the institutional adoption, so now we're just waiting for these sovereign nation states to come in and say we're actively acquiring it, and then the floodgates are open, and I think everyone's kind of looking to the U.S. right now. We talked about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve earlier in the year, but we haven't really seen the follow-through that I think a lot of us might have hoped for. but it seems like that time is coming soon enough. So we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, the focus has been on these corporate Bitcoin treasuries. And I want to get to our next story and talk about them right now, Mauricio, because these Bitcoin treasuries have grown at a remarkable pace in just over the past 2 years. As according to on-chain data, public and private companies have increased their Bitcoin holdings by nearly 450% since early 2023, driven by growing acceptance of Bitcoin as a long-term reserve asset. Now, at the center of that trend, of course, is Strategy, the software company that pioneered the Bitcoin treasury model and now holds roughly 670,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet. The logic behind this strategy is actually pretty straightforward. Bitcoin's long-term price appreciation and fixed supply make it attractive as a hedge against monetary debasement, while holding it on a corporate balance sheet provides investors direct exposure. Now, for a time, that approach delivered outsized returns. However, the past year has underscored the risks of amplified exposure. You see, while Bitcoin itself has experienced a relatively modest pullback of late, Strategy stock has declined far more sharply, highlighting how leverage cuts both ways. Now, the divergence is forcing investors to reassess the broader category. Not all Bitcoin treasury companies operate from the same foundation. Some are profitable businesses using Bitcoin as a reserve asset, while others are weaker firms leaning on crypto exposure to boost relevance or stock performance. Now, as volatility returns, those differences are becoming more and more visible. Holding Bitcoin can enhance a strong business model, but it doesn't compensate for poor fundamentals. The market is now drawing a clearer lines between disciplined treasury strategies and opportunistic ones, a sorting process that may ultimately strengthen the model rather than weaken it. Bringing Mauricio back. Mauricio, corporate Bitcoin treasuries have grown nearly 450% in the past 2 years, but recent volatility has exposed big differences between companies. What separates a business using Bitcoin as a long-term reserve from one that's just chasing Bitcoin exposure right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a long answer, but I'll try to keep it as concise as I can. So, this, I think what we're seeing is there was a moment of initial excitement, and I reminisce of the. I think it was 2017, 2018, where the original Bitcoin miners were IPOing, and there was like a plethora of Bitcoin miner IPOs. It seemed like there was a new mining company IPOing via SPAC or a Canadian listing, and these were happening almost daily, right? And they were going to market with I was looking at some of these filings, and some of these things were going to market with 45 ASICs, okay? Just like peanuts. And so they were getting listed and they were getting bought. And I was, oh my God. And then initially that was one of my first experiences of looking at this sort of wave of excess, and then it gets trimmed down, and then they got obliterated in the bear market. And then the really good ones came up. And today we have companies like Iron, BitDeer, et cetera, that are doing very well. And they're pivoting to data centers. They have pretty sustainable business models. I think the challenge with the treasury companies is that Michael made a model very popular, which was this idea of Bitcoin you could hold on your balance sheet, and you could hold it and not be considered to be a fund. You're just an operating company, and an operating company can issue debt, and basically this could give you leverage exposure to Bitcoin. For a while, Michael was the only one, so it allowed him to source capital from capital markets at a value proposition that seemed really exciting. So Michael did a few bonds where he took in 0% coupon money. And so the perception was, wow, Michael's borrowing money at 0% to buy Bitcoin, which is obviously growing at more than 0%. And it's basically free money. And they have a lot more better leverage profile than even a 2X fund, because a 2X fund has to source money in the capital markets at the overnight rate. So they have to pay, 4x%, where MicroStrategy was getting it for, implicitly or at a high level, at a headline level, is 0. You then have to go and compute the cost of the options that Michael was giving out on that bond. But I think what's happened is a few things. Number one, because there's more of these treasury companies now, the sort of the low-hanging fruit is gone, right? And if you look at Michael's evolution of how he's accessing cash, he's gone from 0% coupon convertible debt to now preferred equity like STRC that's paying 10.5% to source dollars. So now you can see the premium, right? Like you can see that Michael has to pay 10.5% to get those dollars to buy that Bitcoin. So from 0 to 10.5%, there's a big gap to bridge in terms of your perception of that cost of capital, right? And so you're starting to say, okay, well, if you're paying 10% on this money and your operating business is basically minuscule relative to the Bitcoin position and these bonds you're issuing, then the question becomes, how are you going to get the dollars to repay those, to pay that interest, right? And so then the options are you sell more shares, you sell some Bitcoin, you defer the payouts. But I think people at the beginning, people didn't really question this idea that Michael would just be able to sell more shares at an MNAV of plus, of more than 1 to pay the interest. But now the MNAVs are like basically at 1. The coupon on the dollars you're borrowing is like 10 and change, and you're not going to be diluting comments because your MNAV is at basically 1, so you can't really print more shares. The coupon on the dollar prefers is pretty high, so if you're issuing more 10% money to pay down 10% coupon, you're kind of kicking the can down the road. And then that brings you to the last option, which is you might have to sell some Bitcoin, right? And you're seeing some of these treasury companies going out and selling some Bitcoin. And I think this is what people are looking at and saying, if you're an investor, rarely do you want to catch a falling knife, right? Do you want to wait for the knife to hit the ground, the explosion to kick in, and then when everything is done and it's basically like at the lowest level you could possibly find it, then you'll pick it up from the ground, right? So I think right now you're seeing all these things falling and everybody's thinking, when is it going to stop? Nobody wants to go catch the knife, right? And so I think unless something drastically changes, the knife's probably going to keep falling with price action.
Yeah, I mean, the Bitcoin treasury companies has been maybe the largest narrative in the space for the last year. It seemed like every day a couple more were coming up, but we're learning really quickly that a Bitcoin treasury company is only as good as the steward that is navigating it, right? And not all Bitcoin treasury companies are created equal. And we're seeing like Strategy, for instance, showed us how powerful leveraged Bitcoin exposure can be, and now how painful it can be on the way down, mentioning that, falling knife that you spoke of. So my question for you, Mauricio, is do you think we're at the point where investors are finally learning to distinguish between Bitcoin risk and the added layer of corporate execution risk? It can't just be you put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, number goes up anymore. You have to consider who is actually operating each individual company and how, right? Because they're just not all created equal.
100%. I think we're going back to this idea that, okay, you have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, so what? Right? Like anyone else can go get Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? Like what is that? Your differentiator cannot be, I bought Bitcoin, because then you're not that different. Anybody can go out and buy Bitcoin. The point is, yeah, sure, you have Bitcoin. Your cash balance is not getting diluted to infinity. So what? Right? Like I can buy Bitcoin and hold it myself. Why do I need to pay you to buy the Bitcoin and hold it for me? Right? Like I don't, if I want Bitcoin, I'll go buy it. Show me what you're doing to produce more Bitcoin. And I would argue that you could just tell, it goes back to the same question. How are you making more money? Because you buy Bitcoin with the money you make. So if you're a company and you don't have a way to make money, how are you going to buy Bitcoin? Right? There is no free money machine that you can borrow from to go buy the Bitcoin. Michael's shown us that. So now we're going back to the future, really, or back to the past and saying, great, if you want to be a great valuation as a company, show me how you're making money. And I think a lot of these companies are like, wait a second, no, we didn't get to that on the deck. No, our deck was really about how Bitcoin we're going to buy. And then the investors are saying, yeah, great, but now you raised this money, you bought some Bitcoin. How are you going to keep the lights on and buy more Bitcoin with your actions, as opposed to wait for some free money, zero coupon bond to come around so you can buy more? Those things don't go out. Those things don't exist anymore. Michael took them all. So where are you going to get your free money from? And so they're basically, companies are getting pushed to say, what's your model? How are you going to make money? And then the more abstract your answer, the more your share gets punished, right? So
Right. Yeah, I mean, right now we kind of have, it seems like there's two buckets, right? We have some companies that are holding Bitcoin, are profitable, well-run businesses that utilize Bitcoin as part of a broader strategy. And then you have these weaker firms that are using Bitcoin to boost their own relevance or stock performance despite maybe a dying underlying business. So my question for you, Mauricio, is from a lending and risk management perspective, what mistakes do you see companies make when they treat Bitcoin as a shortcut rather than part of a broader strategy?
many. I've been banging this drum for a while, and my thesis here was that eventually, when I was watching these treasury companies come to market and say we bought Bitcoin and their price popped, to me, it was the equivalent of your son or daughter coming to you and saying, "Daddy, I washed my hands," and you said, "Here's a cookie," right? Like every time you wash, here's a cookie. Like you're rewarding stuff that shouldn't really be rewarded. Like buying Bitcoin with your spare cash should be the normal thing to do, right? Like we shouldn't be going, "Oh my God, that person's a genius because he parked his spare cash in a money market fund or in Bitcoin," right? Like that should be financial hygiene, okay? Like that should be just normal. And so we shouldn't be rewarding you for doing the basic stuff, right? Like basic financial hygiene, which is don't keep cash earning nothing, right? Like go invest it into something that protects its value. And I think what you're seeing now is a return to sanity, right? Like you're not going to get your share price to pop by saying you bought Bitcoin. And people want to know, hey, I don't have a giant melting ice cube in my cash balance, and I'm generating cash flows and I'm generating profits this way, right? Like I could make the argument that if you're just going to have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, you could arguably return that as a dividend to your shareholders and have them buy the Bitcoin and hold it, right? Like what's the real difference in doing so, right? And so the big differentiator is how are you going to use your publicly listed status to build a business that can scale, generate more money, and basically lean on the fact that you're big. Like this is the other problem. Typically, companies go to the stock market when they're very large and they have a huge, regulatory compliance team. It's you have so much structure that the publicly listed structure is just, in Venezuela we say, one more stripe on the tiger, right? Like it's like it's one more thing. You don't need it, right? But you're getting these companies that are going from zero babies, like 5-person teams, boom, you're listed. Go at it, right? It's very expensive and burdensome to carry a regulated business. And if you don't have an immediate answer or explanation as to why you're doing this, all you're doing this is for your share price to pop and for you to announce you're buying Bitcoin, you can be in for a long time of potentially painful operations because there's overhead and there's a scrutiny that comes with being public.
Right. No, so true. And Mauricio, one of the things I love talking about you and others in this space that are so deeply ingrained in the Bitcoin ecosystem is I like to zoom out and kind of get a sense of where you see things heading moving forward after this Bitcoin Treasury narrative plays itself out a little bit more. Because as this market kind of sorts itself out, do you think it ultimately will strengthen the Bitcoin Treasury model by forcing more discipline going forward? Or does it maybe scare off companies that might have adopted it more responsibly? How do you see this playing out?
I see this playing out as there's going to be a weeding out of the weaker treasury companies. So they will either fall out of relevance or get bought in and torn apart to get the Bitcoin out. If they're trading under NAV, they'll get picked up by one that has a positive NAV. So I expect to see a lot of consolidation and M&A. I expect I'm only a Bitcoin treasury model to eventually die out, right? Like you're going to be a business with Bitcoin under balance sheet. This idea that I am a professional Bitcoin treasury company, I don't know that will remain for too much longer. I think you'll be just a business that has Bitcoin on its balance sheet and uses it to access financial products and instruments, or perhaps boost or enhance other types of offerings, right? Like your corporate bond or something along those lines. But it will just become normal. Like it'll be like,
Right.
you know, it'll be like somebody telling you, oh, I have some S&P 500 index units in my RRSP, right? It's you know, it'll be as normal as, you know, you, Hank, or me having some type of index fund in my retirement account, right? Like it'll just be what you
Right.
do with spare cash. And so I
Right.
think we'll go away from this whole, you know, I'm great because I have this much Bitcoin on my balance sheet and I can do stuff
Right.
with it. I think you know that increasingly is going to be less differentiating, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so you're going to
It
have to
does, yeah.
find ways to continue exciting the market. So yeah, and I think we're in the early innings of this sort of trend evolving into the end state, which is, yeah, great, you have some Bitcoin instead of cash. You know, what else is in your balance sheet?
Right.
What else is in your income statement, right?
Yeah, I think this will all be dictated by economic and financial Darwinism, kind of as most things in life are. The cream will rise, and those will be the ones that survive, and that'll be the playbook going forward. So we'll see how that all plays out. Now, we're running out of time here, Mauricio, but before I let you go, I'm sure you gained quite a few fans in our audience this morning that are interested in learning more about you and all the amazing services over at Ledn. What's the best place I can send them in case they want to learn more?
Ledn.io. That's where all of our information is. You know, that you can find everything about our loans there. Our DMs are open on X at Hodl with Ledn. I am at Cryptonomist with an A at the end, Cryptonomista. And yeah, Hodl with Ledn. Ledn.io if you want to learn more.
Rock and roll. Well, always a pleasure having you on the show, Mauricio. Thank you for joining us on this Monday, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, my friend.
You too, Hank. Take care, man.
Cheers. See you next time. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, more of today's top stories, including the death of Hollywood director Rob Reiner and why Meta is being investigated for fraud. All that coming up when we return. Stay tuned. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. And we're back with RoxomTV News, getting back into this morning's top stories. Next up, Rob Reiner, the actor, director, and producer behind some of the most influential films in modern American cinema, and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner were found dead Sunday in their Los Angeles home. Rob's son Nick Reiner has been arrested and booked following the killings of his parents. Los Angeles police are investigating the deaths as an apparent homicide. Investigators believe both Reiner and his wife suffered stab wounds, and a family member is being questioned as part of the ongoing investigation. The Los Angeles Fire Department responded to a medical aid call shortly after 3:30 p.m. and found a 78-year-old man and 68-year-old woman deceased inside the home, located in the Brentwood neighborhood on the city's west side. Now, for anyone who somehow missed Rob Reiner's cultural footprint, Reiner was the creative force behind This Is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and a defining figure in both television and film across 5 decades. But beyond celebrity, this is a moment that requires restraint. The next developments will depend on forensic findings, interviews, and whether investigators can establish a clear sequence of events inside the home. Until then, the focus remains on the investigation itself and allowing law enforcement to determine what happened without rushing to conclusions. And on the other side of the earth, Ukraine may be redrawing one of its biggest red lines. After nearly 4 years of war with Russia, President Volodymyr Zelensky is now openly signaling that Ukraine could abandon its long-standing goal of joining NATO. This came during 5 hours of talks in Berlin with U.S. envoys sent by President Donald Trump, as negotiations to end the war entered what multiple officials are calling a critical moment. Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, said that a lot of progress was made and talks are set to continue, though details remain tightly held. The headline shift is this: Zelensky is offering to drop NATO membership in exchange for binding Western security guarantees, including Article 5-style protections from the United States and firm commitments from European allies, Canada, and Japan. That is a major concession. Ukraine's NATO aspiration is written into its constitution and has been viewed as the ultimate shield against future Russian aggression. But Zelensky made clear this is already a compromise, saying NATO membership was never fully supported by all Western partners to begin with. Russia has long demanded Ukraine renounce NATO ambitions, and Moscow has also insisted Ukraine remain neutral and accept territorial losses, demands Kiev continues to reject. Zelensky reiterated that a ceasefire along current front lines could be acceptable, but ceding territory is still off the table. Germany's defense minister welcomed the talks, but warned bluntly that security guarantees without strong U.S. involvement wouldn't be worth much. That warning is rooted in history. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 in exchange for security assurances that ultimately failed. Now, Ukraine is testing whether the West is willing to put real legal and military weight behind its promises. For markets and geopolitics, this matters because it hints at a possible endgame. Not peace yet, but a reshuffling of priorities where stability may finally outweigh symbolism. And in this war, even small shifts can move global risk sentiment very fast. And Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, is facing renewed scrutiny after a Reuters investigation revealed it knowingly tolerated large volumes of fraudulent advertising from China to avoid disrupting a major revenue stream. According to internal documents reviewed by Reuters, Meta determined that roughly 19% of its China-linked advertising revenue, more than $3 billion annually, came from scam ads, including fraudulent investments, illegal gambling, and other prohibited content. China officially blocks its citizens from using Meta's platform, but Chinese companies are still allowed to advertise to users abroad. That loophole turned China into a massive business line for Meta, generating more than $18 billion in ad revenue in 2024, over 10% of the company's global sales. The problem internally was scale. Meta staff concluded that China was the origin of roughly a quarter of all scam and banned product ads globally. In 2024, Meta quietly launched a specialized anti-fraud team targeting Chinese advertisers. That team cut harmful ads nearly in half within months. Then the effort stopped. Internal documents show that after follow-up from CEO Mark Zuckerberg tied to an internal integrity strategy pivot, the China-focused enforcement team was disbanded. New Chinese ad agencies were allowed back onto the platform, and several proposed safeguards were shelved entirely. Within months, scam ads rebounded, and by mid-2025, banned ads had climbed back to about 16% of Meta's China revenue, according to the documents. Now, the structure of Meta's China ad business complicates enforcement. Ads are sold through a network of large Chinese resellers who recruit smaller agencies, creating layers of intermediaries. Some top-tier partners receive special protections, meaning flagged ads can stay live while undergoing secondary review, often long enough for scammers to extract value before removal. Internal reports warn that this system made enforcement inconsistent and predictable to bad actors. One consulting report commissioned by Meta concluded that Meta's own policies were encouraging fraud, noting that Chinese authorities rarely intervene when scams target foreign users. Meta says the China-focused enforcement team was always temporary and insists it continues to remove millions of violating ads globally through automated systems. But the documents reveal a blunt internal calculation. Aggressive enforcement worked, and then it was paused because the revenue impact is too high. That tension between user protection and ad dollars is now front and center as regulators and lawmakers weigh whether Meta's internal trade-offs crossed a line. Well, gang, that looks like that is a wrap for today's Monday edition of Roxom TV News. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to join us. If you haven't already, make sure you do the thing and follow us at Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV on whichever platforms you choose to participate in. And we'll be back tomorrow with more of today's world news right here on Roxom TV News. We'll see you then.